to be recording today's presentation for folks that need to reference it later. So please just be aware of that. My name is Tom Barnett. I am the Deputy Director in the Department of Housing and Community Development, responsible for the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness. And as part of that is our grants management team, which manages grants like the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Investment Partnership Program. I'm going to introduce you to some of the staff in just a second, but I want to say that Tom Fleetwood, who's the Director of Department of Housing and Community Development, wishes he could be here, but he had prior commitment. But he thanks you all, both for the great work that you've done utilizing these funds, and we all share the excitement and enthusiasm for seeing what kind of project proposals will be coming in the future. These funds have done so much good over many years, and housing people who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, and we know it's going to continue to do more good work. So with that, let me first introduce Laura Lazo. And Laura, if you don't mind, just, I guess, saying your position.
Good afternoon, everyone. Laura Lasso, Associate Director of Grants Management, and I'm happy to see some familiar faces and see some new ones as well. Turn it over to Jenny.
Yes, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Nice to see you all as well. I am Jenny Sue, and I'm a Senior Program Manager in the Grants Management team with Laura.
Thank you, Jenny. And Malia, would you mind introducing yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Malia Strobel. I'm Admin Support for the Grants Management Division.
Wonderful. And while we don't have Mr. Sheehan listed, Casey, would you mind introducing yourself, that you play a role here as well?
Sure. I'm Casey Sheehan. I'm the Contract Procurement Coordinator for the Department of Housing.
All right, thank you. I think we got all the Department of Housing staff. So we encourage you throughout to type in questions into the chat. We'll take breaks and answer questions where it makes sense, and allow time at the end as well for more questions. So with that, we can go on to the next slide, and you see the agenda for today. Again, my name is Tom Barnett. We have the available funding and more details about the request for proposals from Laura, the underwriting and closing process from Jenny, as well as the post-closing demographic reporting from Malia and ongoing monitoring from Jenny, as well as Q&As. So please, we encourage you to ask as many questions as you have, and don't be shy.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. Malia, if you could turn to the next slide, please. And so, as Tom said, in our agenda, we have a Q&A session set aside at the very end. And like he said, if you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat and we will answer it during the Q&A session. Or if you would like, you can wait until that formal time at the end in order to pose it to us, and we will respond at the very end. Regarding available funding, this year for our grants management request for proposal, we have an estimated $357,000 in home and community housing development organizational funding. And as you can see on the next slide, we mention that there will be a notice of funding availability that is also available, since, as some of you know, we typically allocate more funding through our traditional RFP. This year with the $357,000, it's a bit more limited, but that's because we're spending our regular CDBG and home funding to be coordinated competitively as part of the RHA's larger notice of funding availability. And that is being finalized, and it will be publicized and available soon. Regarding our RFP timeline, you can see it on this screen. We released the RFP, so hopefully some of you had a chance to take a look at that on August 8th. Today is our pre-proposal conference, and submissions are due by 4 o'clock on September 22nd. We anticipate doing the review and scoring of proposals with our selection advisory committee in October and November timeframe. And currently, we're estimated to go to the RHA for approval of the SAC's recommended funding awards around December 14th. January is when we anticipate in the new year to do our post-award kickoff meeting. This next slide is just a friendly reminder that September 22nd, 4 p.m. deadline is a firm deadline. And so, as you know, just in case there's any traffic or computer hiccups or cyberspace gremlins, if you're choosing to submit online, please be aware that September 22nd, 4 p.m. is in fact a hard deadline. The website that you see listed is where you can get the good materials and information, more specifically the application guidelines and evaluation form and scoring criteria that we'll go over in a little bit. Friendly reminder, your application must include an application form, supplemental materials to be submitted either electronically with a delivery of one hard copy to me, and you can contact me for an Ignite link to submit electronically, or you can deliver 5 hard copies, including that one original, to our HCD Pender site. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Malia or to me. And I'll put a copy of the PowerPoint on HCD's webpage after the end of this pre-proposal conference, so you have all the PowerPoint slides and reference materials at your fingertips. Regarding who is eligible as a project, funding may be used for acquisition and rehab of properties that will provide affordable rental housing for low and moderate income households. And we define that as 80% area median income or below. What we're looking for in our grants management request for proposal, as excuse me, many of you traditionally know, it's the scattered site rental projects, condominiums, townhouses, single family, as well as multifamily rental projects, 30 units or less. I say this just because the larger NOFA that I made mention of earlier, where we're sending some of our CDBG and home funding to, that's traditionally been for the larger multifamily projects. But this specific proposal is really for the littler guys. Vacant properties are preferred, and the reason for that is if relocation is required, because there are federal funds involved, certain steps need to be taken. For example, your organization would be responsible, adhering to federal regulations, if there are any relocation costs that would be incurred by your organization. And so our Director of Homeownership and Relocation, Carol Earhart, she should be contacted as soon as possible once your property is identified, just to work through any of those relocation issues. As I mentioned, this year's request for a proposal that we are administering is fully funded by Community Housing Development Organizational Funding, CHODO funding for short. And so the definition for a CHODO can be found in the Regulatory Guidance Part 92, but more easily, Appendix 7 of the RFP application guidelines that you can access through the website goes through step by step in a checklist form what exactly are the CHODO requirements specifically. In general, that third bullet explains there are certain legal status requirements, as well as organizational capacity, structure, and then the entity's relationship with a for-profit entity. Now, let's take a moment to talk more specifically about those application guidelines that you can find on the website. And thank you, Malia. She's going to switch to pull up those guidelines once you click on the website that I mentioned. And so as you can see, the first part talks about the Board of Supervisors' goal of producing a minimum of 10,000 new units of affordable housing by 2034. And then as Malia is showing you, there are various reference documents that are handy. Eligible applicants, you must be a nonprofit organization designated by the IRS, have sound financial condition, no current debarment, and then there's that Ignite address mentioned that you would need to request from me if you're choosing to submit electronically. The purpose of the RFP is reiterated here for you. And federal funds available, that $357,806 in home funding. Award of funds will be made by that selection advisory committee that I mentioned in October and November. In terms of minimum project requirements for all projects, proposals must be consistent with the needs and priorities identified in our 5-year consolidated plan, as well as 1-year action plan. And then number 2, it's important just to remind y'all, the project finance must be located in Fairfax County or one of our participating jurisdictions, including towns of Clifton, Vienna, Herndon, City of Fairfax, City of Falls Church. Scrolling through, you'll see mention of the importance of adhering to Davis-Bacon, lead-based paint, Section 3. And then this is what you see on the screen now, just the home eligible activities. Continuing on, you'll eventually come to our loan terms. Friendly reminder, the type of financing that's offered for this specific RFP is a deferred non-amortizing loan at the interest rate of 2%. And that 2% is a deferred simple interest loan, meaning during the period of affordability, which is 30 years minimum, the principal loan balance is deferred and no payments are needed. That 2% interest is just accrued. And if you choose to sell or no longer use your property as affordable housing after that 30 years, then you would be liable to pay back the RHA only that simple 2% interest. In terms of disbursement of funds, once you have a property identified, you would go through a loan underwriting process that we'll talk about a little bit later. That, for the most part, is the information on our guidance. There are appendices that are also contained in the guidance document, and we'll take a moment. We can turn back to the PowerPoint presentation just to talk a little bit about the 8 appendices. So hopefully you can take a look at your convenience at the larger guidelines document. In terms of the various appendix documents, the first, as I mentioned, the community-wide housing strategic plan and consolidated plan. That's a really good page to look for because it has a great summary of what the county's goals and priorities are surrounding affordable housing, and specifically how we use our community development block grant, our home investment partnerships funding, emergency solutions grant funding. Some of the other important appendices to take a look at are the 4th, 5th, and 6th ones, the ones that say home maximum per unit subsidy limits, home rent limitations, and home income limits, just because currently the funding through this request for proposal is all home funding. In terms of the Choto checklist, that is Appendix 7, and that is, as I mentioned earlier, a helpful document just to go through and take a look at what's required to be certified by my agency, HCD, to be a community housing development organization. And then lastly, if you're doing extensive rehab on your particular project, there are Fairfax County rehab standards that need to be followed. For the next slide, once again, we summarize the various reference documents that were mentioned in that application guidelines. And as I mentioned before, the Board of Supervisors has stated a goal of a minimum 10,000 new affordable housing units by 2034. And so it's important just to view your potential project as part of the overall strategies that the county has for affordable housing, strategies listed in these various documents here. Regarding the consolidated plan, that is something that spans from fiscal year 2022 to 2026. And that is something that is submitted to the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level every 5 years. So we expect all of our projects to align with that 5-year plan because that's what HUD is expecting us to spend our federal funding on. For the next slide, slide 13, this is a summary of the federal home requirements, and it's some important information that you would want to be aware of. As I mentioned, for income targeting for these funds, it would be for beneficiaries or tenants who are 80% of the area median income or below. But just to let you know, the little asterisk at the very bottom states the county uses stricter income prioritizing, that at 60% AMI or below for our specific RFP projects. So you can see why we're prioritizing projects serving that lower AMI level. Multifamily projects of 5 or more units must have at least 20% of those units serving less than 50% AMI, and that's a HUD requirement. I mentioned the maximum per unit subsidy and rent limits, and there are appendices for that if you're not familiar with them or just need a refresher. And then period of affordability, there's a certain span that's required by HUD based on the amount of funding invested. And then the RHA extends that years of affordability for a total of 30 years. And once again, you see information about HUD the Home and Community Housing Development Organization requirements. There are some other federal requirements as a result of this federal funding. Davis-Bacon, Section 3, Fair Housing, and you can see Tony Essie is the contact person for Davis-Bacon and Section 3 questions. And then for Fair Housing, Enforcement and Education questions, our county's Office of Human Rights and Equity Programs is our expert sister agency that assists with those. Additional federal requirements. Environmental reviews, what HUD requires is before we can begin a project that's tapping into federal funding, we must ensure that environmental concerns are resolved. And lead-based paint testing, if you're doing rehab and work in the property before occupancy, there also are certain requirements. And Tony Essie, once again, is the lead person for our agency. Relocation, as I mentioned before, any questions related to that? If a property is occupied as you're looking at it or recently occupied, Carol Earhart, our Director of Homeownership, would be the one to connect with in order to receive clearance on that. Let's now talk more about the evaluation criteria, since that's kind of the meat of our pre-proposal conference. Your project's proposals will be scored on a scale of 100 through 4 different criteria, and you can see them as Malia, thank you for pulling that up, scrolls to the bottom of page 1. The 4 criteria, and just to let you know, this year's evaluation form and scoring criteria is very, very similar to previous years with just some updates based on the type of funding available. But the 4 criteria still are demonstration of need, project preparation, innovation and collaboration, management capacity, and real estate experience. And the last one, capacity for project financing and leveraging. And so as Malia scrolls through, I can point out just some key highlights. First, demonstration of need. Just to reiterate, alignment with the consolidated plan, community-wide housing strategic plan. And what you see where she's paused the screen is mention of special populations, special needs, and how we define it for the purpose of this application. Folks 60% AMI who are elderly, youth transitioning out of foster care, homeless, persons with disabilities, be they physical, mental, or sensory, veterans, large households, and then those who are 80% of AMI and below who are survivors of domestic violence. What we're looking for here is your mention of the target population. Who are you serving? Who would you like to reside in the property that you're looking to purchase? And then also, what we're looking for too is to what extent is your project proposal in an area that's lacking affordable housing? To the extent possible, perhaps in a mixed income. Permanent supportive housing is certainly an area that you may have heard the Board of Supervisors talk about in terms of the importance. And so we have points attributed to any projects that provide for those wraparound supportive services, case management, or anything else to enable individuals to live as independently as possible in a community setting. And then lastly, proximity to public transportation, how we define that. General rule of thumb is less than 0.25 miles from a bus stop or about half a mile or less from a rail station. For criteria number 2, project preparation, innovation, and collaboration, what we're really looking to see from y'all is your knowledge about housing in the proposed project that you're submitting. We're looking for the project to be fully occupied no later than 24 months from the date of the RHA grant award in December. And this is where hopefully you put pen to paper, so to speak, to really give rich detail about your plan and how you'll complete your project, the timeline for acquisition, development, rehabilitation, and occupancy. And there are some priority points as Malia is focusing on, higher points for those that can complete their project and be fully occupied within 9 months from the date of the award. And then the highest points if you're able to complete the acquisition and rehab by April 19th, 2024, and be fully occupied within 6 months from the date of the RHA award. There isn't a specific need to identify a site at the time you submit your project, but certainly there are some higher points if you are able to do so. And then as you can see, some points attributed to if you have any innovative ideas or if you're collaborating with other organizations just to provide the richest experience for a consumer constituent to be successful and live independently. For the third criteria, management capacity and real estate experience, what we're really looking for here is your organizational capacity to be successful and to demonstrate not only to acquire and perhaps rehab the project and find the initial tenant, but more importantly, to meet the ongoing 30-year affordability program requirement. And so this is where we're looking to see your organization's successful track record in owning and managing real estate. We're looking to see too, if you may not have established track record, and that's okay, but to what extent are you partnered with another nonprofit who does have that experience? We're looking to see what staff will be involved and their expertise as it pertains to your proposed project. And then we're looking for your program compliance and program management experience, specifically how it relates to the home program or CDBG, since this application is funded by those federal dollars. And then we'd like for you to indicate if you've previously received funding from us or done similar projects using other funding. How have you met completion deadlines? So our selection advisory committee can know how well you've been successful in implementing what you've proposed to do after award of funds. For the fourth and last criteria, there's 2 pages. One is for smaller projects and the second is for multifamily, but we can take a look at this particular one that Malia is showing. And what we're looking for is your organization fiscally sound? Are your project costs realistic? Have you identified additional resources besides county funds or county contributions that can help support the capital aspect of the proposed project? What we're hoping to do is to ensure that the project that you're proposing that has been put together with a clear timeline for acquisition and rehab and occupancy, that you in fact have the right budget and the right costs attributed to what you're proposing to do, and that through the course of the 30-year affordability, you have a successful chance for a positive annual cash flow to support that project. The leveraging piece, you'll notice, is important to the county because we have limited federal resources and we want to be able to see how we can be partners in this endeavor. And part of that partnership, we're hoping you're able to bring to the table some funding. There's 5% of non-county resources as a higher points can be gained, and then highest points if you're able to demonstrate additional written commitments of at least 20% of non-county resources towards the total estimated capital project. Now, I would be remiss if I said, if you have a solid proposal, you're helping a population that really needs to be served in the county, but you don't have that 5 or 20% match, that's okay. We certainly have funded proposals in the past who don't have that full leveraging ability, but we make mention of it since that is something that the board and the county is interested in doing. Lastly, it's mentioning that we would want you to include details about how your project plans to maintain adequate operating, maintenance, and capital replacement reserves during that 30-year affordability, since we know that sometimes it is a challenge, particularly with the rents that are generated when serving folks at the lower AMI levels, how to make up enough revenue in order to pay for any unanticipated or planned capital rehab projects, as well as just your annual operating expenses. With that, we're ready to go back to our PowerPoint presentation and enter into the part of the pre-proposal conference where we talk a little bit about underwriting requirements. And so this is where, if you've been successfully awarded a grant and loan from the Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority, what then must you think about when you're implementing that project that you've successfully proposed and been awarded money for? And I'll turn it to Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Like Laura said, the underwriting process is after you've been awarded. So imagine yourself in 2024, in the early months of 2024, and you have a ratified sales contract that you have to acquire a unit. The magic number for the underwriting timeframe is 45 days. 45 days from the date of closing of the unit to fulfill your RFP project. So 45 days prior, we want to have HCD staff ensure and work together with you to ensure that the project is meeting all the federal requirements for your home award funds, as well as the contract with RHA. And a key component during the underwriting process is getting the loan underwriting committee approval of using this, of getting this RHA loan for this acquisition. Typically, the loan underwriting committee is, or called LUC or LUC. That approval process is about 2 weeks prior to the closing date of the unit. And the loan underwriting committee is made up of Tom Fleetwood and senior leadership here at HCD and the RHA. Next slide. So for the underwriting process, as it's kickstarted, it kickstarts 45 days before the expected closing date. So at the very beginning, those who have that ratified sales contract has to notify Laura Lazo that this project is moving forward, and Laura will assign someone in grants management to become the underwriter for this acquisition. And concurrently, nonprofits are asked to start doing the checklist of items, property appraisals, or requesting appraisals, inspections of the unit, and then requesting the relocation environmental review clearance and providing notices to the supervisor or commissioner of the district that this acquisition will occur in. Here is a little bit more comprehensive list of all the documents and reports that are required for underwriting that the nonprofit has to submit to the assigned underwriter. More details on the underwriting materials will be provided post-award during the kickoff meeting in January of next year. So this is just a quick list. We won't go too much into detail, but basically these underwriting documents have to be received prior to the LUC review and approval of the acquisition. So it's not, these documents have to be well timed with the LUC approval date. And then after closing, after LUC, these are the items that we have to set up between the LUC approval date and the date of closing, which has to be at least 10 business days in between the LUC and the closing date, so that the underwriting staff can help draft up the closing documents for the acquisition with the help of the assigned attorney, county attorney, and the finance division has the time to set up the transfer wire for the funds on the to be transferred on the date of closing. All right, next. And Laura went over the financing terms, but here they are again. These will be included in the closing documents that are executed for each acquisition. Also included in the home contract that will be executed is an agreement to earmark 25% of the net monthly income for each unit in excess of $200 that will be deposited into a RHA reserve account. And with that, I will hand it off to Malia.
So regardless of the type of use of the funds that you've applied for, I will be reaching out to you to obtain beneficiary information. There's a form that we go out that goes out to capture information needed for HUD's use. So it's very important that based on the date that you say the unit will be occupied, that you're able to provide me with the tenant information so that we could get that to HUD in a timely manner. If there's a property where there's more than one household, I may have to reach out to you again just to make sure that we have information for all households in that property. Also, it's very important that if there's any delays, as we know sometimes that does happen, that you keep in touch with the project manager or myself so that we're aware of the status and can give HUD an expected date of when that information will be obtained. Thank you in advance. I know that You'll have a lot of things coming your way as time goes on, but this information is very important so that we can comply with HUD requirements. Back to Jenny.
And I just wanted to clarify that this demographic report is only filled out and submitted once for each acquisition. And once it's submitted, we won't be asking for this demographic report again for that unit, because sometimes it can be confused with the annual monitoring that we have, that we send out, which is a different template. So next slide. So during the affordability period of your units, which will be 30 years, HCD staff will be in contact with nonprofits to conduct annual desk monitoring of those units that have been assisted. We kind of coincide that desk monitoring with the publication of HUD's rent and income limits. They're updated usually around spring, summertime every year. So we use that this monitoring as a way to get the new limits out. And then we also attach a template asking nonprofits to fill out household and unit information to capture, to provide a point in time capture of the income size and recertification, last recertification dates of households, and the rents charged, just to ensure that we are complying with those limits. We might also do additional administrative and financial monitoring from afar, depending on how we determine in the beginning of the year what needs to be monitored. And the separate periodic on-site monitoring occurs in the first 12 months of project completion, and then once every 1 to 3 years. So for those scattered site units, those units will be on-site monitored once every 3 years, but for multi-family units with lots of units, only the entire project would be monitored once every 3 years, and then a sample of 20% of the multifamily units will be taken to look at the project, taken to do the file review for those projects. And the on-site monitoring basically is in-depth project review of the unit and tenant files. So we'll look at how you guys did the income recertifications, how the rent is being calculated, and whether they are in line with home regs. And then we'll do property inspections and look at how property standards are maintained. So that's just a few of the items that we would be looking at. And that would be the on-site monitoring that occurs. With that, I will turn it back to Laura to do Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jenny, Malia. With that concludes our formal presentation part. And we know that we threw a lot of information at you. And so certainly if you have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll toggle between both, kind of peeking to see if there are questions in the chat, as well as if you're raising your hand, we can answer questions there as well. First, there was a question that was asked in advance of the pre-proposal conference that I want just to share with all of you. The question was, do you need to be a CHODO to submit an RFP application by the September 22nd submission deadline? And their answer is no. You don't need to be a certified CHODO, and it's HCD staff, so it would be me or Jenny or Malia that would certify you. But no, you don't need to be certified by us prior to September 22nd in order to submit an application. But what is required is for you to be certified by the time funding decisions are being recommended by the SAC. So given the October-November timeframe, I ask you to please be certified and submit information to us by about October the 18th. Probably the end of that week would be the very latest. So October 18th, and then is what I would aim for. October 20th or so would be the hard deadline to be certified as a CHODO. If you have any questions about that, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to walk you through Appendix 7, the checklist, which indicates what are the requirements to be a CHOTO. And let's take a look at the chat first to see if there were any questions. A question came in from Holly. Is new construction eligible, pre-development and construction phases, or is this only for purchase rehab of currently standing housing? That's a great question. Construction is an eligible use for home CHOTO funding in certain circumstances. And so I'd be happy to talk through more specifically what your project ideas are to make sure it's eligible for home funding. But yes, in general, home funding can support new construction in certain circumstances. George had a question. Is site control required at time of application? No. We've had successful awards made to nonprofit entities who have identified specific neighborhoods and where they would like to purchase, but they have not identified a specific project, so therefore they do not have site control. So that's okay. If you have proposed neighborhoods, if you have an actual site identified, we also have had nonprofits in the past who've been successfully awarded loans under contract. They have a property under contract at the time they submit their application, and they've been able to work with the particular seller that their purchase is contingent on receiving funding from the RHA. And they've been able to negotiate a 3-4 month time frame in order to go to closing, because that particular seller was very interested in supporting affordable housing in Fairfax County. So we've seen both extremes, or both ends of the continuum, if you will, from just identification of a neighborhood, no site control, to actual contract on a particular property. Candace asked, are there any major differences in this year's RFP compared to last year? For the most part, it's very, very similar, except for the funding is only for home funding as opposed to regular CDBG and home funding. And then who's considered eligible to apply? That would be the key difference. You must be a certified community housing development organization this year. And we can work through Appendix 7 with you if you're unfamiliar with that. Any other questions? Because those were the questions from the chat that I saw. I'm happy to entertain, or Malia, Jenny, Tom, and I are happy to entertain any additional questions. Seeing none, definitely we appreciate you spending a part of your afternoon with us, and we wish you the best of luck if you are intending to submit an application. September 22nd, 4 p.m. We will look forward to receiving those. And just think, before you submit it, whether it's hard copy or electronically, put on the hat of a selection advisory committee reviewer, is what I always say, and just go through your application with the criteria and say, hey, can I truly earn the full 5 points here, 10 points, 2 points? Is it easy for that SAC reviewer to find the information? Because sometimes what we've seen is you may put together the package, but it might not be as clear to someone who isn't as familiar with how wonderful and successful you've been in developing affordable housing and providing low income and moderate income residents with tenancy and supporting them with wraparound services. You know what you do really well and have been successful, but make sure that you can write it in a way that someone who is unfamiliar with your organization can give you all the points that you deserve. So with that, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing your application. And if you have questions, please reach out to Malia and me. Tom.
Laura, yeah, sorry. Holly did ask one more question about the recording.
Oh, yes. Yes, the recording will also be made available along with the PowerPoint on HCD's website as soon as I can figure out the technology friends that I have in HCD to make that available to all of you. So yes. So thank you very much.